I eat beef, I eat pork, I am a Christian, and I also dip into my indigenous faith system for sustenance. I usually don't like to wear my religious and ethnic identity on my sleeve, but in today's India, it is imperative. It is imperative that I stand here and tell those people who wish us away who I am. All of us have to raise our voices and talk about the multi-layered identities that all of us hold. When India got its independence in 1947, the self-governing Khasi states that make up a major part of Meghalaya were unsure of joining the larger nation state called India. And that was okay. There were attempts then, even at such a crucial juncture in our history, of the leaders, both Indian and the Khasi leaders, to come together to think about this hesitation that the Khasi states and the Khasi people had as something that is legitimate, something that needs to be acknowledged, debated, and taken seriously. Today, however, when representatives from our region are being silenced in the parliament, it is hard to imagine that Reverend J.J.M. Nichols-Roy confronted the majoritarian-minded leaders of the Constituent Assembly, who openly and confronted them by saying that we do not want to be assimilated, when one of the members said that we ought to be assimilating these tribals of India into the notion of a dominant Indian culture and society. He said, and I quote, "It is said by one honorable gentleman that the hill tribes have to be brought to the culture, which he said, our culture, meaning the culture of the plainsmen. But what is culture? Does it mean dress or eating and drinking? If it means eating and drinking or ways of living, the hill tribes can claim that they have a better system that some of the people of the plains do not. I think the latter must rise up to their standard. Amongst tribesmen, there is no difference between class and class. Is that practiced in the plains?" Unquote. Actively supported in the Constituent Assembly by visionary leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Dr. Ambedkar, our leaders like Reverend J.J.M. Nichols-Roy, Jaipal Singh Munda and others spoke fearlessly of the visions and aspirations of the small tribes. And they fought to ensure constitutional provisions of autonomy that became enshrined in the 5th and the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution. The democracy that India envisaged for itself at its founding moment was not going to be just a brutality of numbers, but an everyday aspiration of many sovereignties and freedoms. I grew up listening to the stories about people from our hills, such as Mavis Dunn, one of the first woman cabinet ministers in India, who articulated both the desire for Khasi freedom and also the freedom for Khasi women. I also learned about Wilson Reed, who gate-crashed a meeting of Prime Minister Nehru, demanding provincial autonomy for Assam for the hill tribes. They did this without fear of reprisal or arrest. All of it now seems like a dream. Every day, a new ideological horror is being perpetrated against all of us. 7 decades on, that promise of the Constitution of India, of ensuring open dialogues, of tentative relationships being okay, of the possibility of questioning being the edifice upon which our multicultural, multi-ethnic communities will determine their collective lives, is being undermined. Or in the words of one of the scholars from the Khasi Hills, late L.G. Sholai, it is as if we have exchanged British India for Bharat India, or the Hindu Rashtra being peddled today. Today, we no longer refer to those who ought to be representing us as our government. More and more, we are referring to those in power as the regime. And this is telling. Regime, a word that conjures in our minds the feeling of being controlled, of having little choices, and of being regimented into one uniform India. For us from the Northeast, uniformity is an impossibility. And that is not only okay, but it has actually allowed us to thrive. With over 200 tribes, having 300 plus languages and dialects between us, we also contend with diverse cultural practices, customs, and religions. A constellation of indigenous faiths and beliefs, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, heterodox Hinduism, find expression across our region. We are also a region that has, before the maps got drawn and set, lived our relationships beyond the hills and the rivers that define India's territoriality. Which is why when the military coup in Myanmar happened and that forced the people to flee, the communities in states like Mizoram ensured refuge to them. Mizoram as a state, understanding the sentiment of a shared history and community relations, extended a helping hand. And it is here that we find ourselves at odds with a regressive push of papering over these myriad and minute elements that define us. There can never be one nation, one law, one belief to encapsulate our multi-layered identities, relationships, and ways of being. Federalism, as a key principle, therefore, should not be emphasized merely as the sharing of powers between the Union and the states. Federalism should be an acknowledgement of the diversity within states and regions, an acceptance that this experience of plural identities and relationships is best understood by those living it. If these local experiences, if this knowledge is what is allowed to inform policy and governance, the union of states, as envisaged by the framers of our Constitution, would indeed become a reality. The very idea of India, where smaller communities like ours could have a political, economic, and cultural voice, seem very, very distant now under this regime. Although, to be truthful, the relationship between India and the Northeast, very soon after independence, was sought to be turned into one of a patron-client relationship overseen by the security state. But that process has now been further weaponized in favor of Delhi. And the federal imagination is now being replaced by notions of double-engine governments. For smaller states in the Northeast, it is a reality that even when all of us are combined together, we do not command the political clout, the legislative clout in terms of the number of representatives, and that is about to get even smaller if the new proposed delimitation go through. And it is also a fact that for many northeastern states, our economies are crippled. This dependency on the center has been used as a tool to put us in our place. An arm twisting that has pitted one neighboring state against another, and most crucially, pushing communities and tribes to be wary and suspicious of each other. Double-engine government has meant a replication of the divisive politics and hate that is on exhibition at the center. What is happening in Manipur today, for instance, is precisely this. A double-engine government that is twice complicating the already complex history and tenuous relationships among the people in the state. The double-engine government has doubled the oppression, doubled the violence, and doubled the mistrust. The failure to contain the violence in Manipur for the last 5 months now clearly shows not only the complicity of the double-engine government, but a glaring undermining And this undermining is by design of the federal guarantees of our constitution. Manipur has also shown us how a regime can use communities, their sense of specialness and deprivation, and the notions of majority to form blocs and cliques and cartels that can so easily be deployed for the larger sinister geopolitical narratives and visions of an Akhand Bharat. I do not claim to be speaking on behalf of the people of Manipur. I do not belong to that state. I am their neighbor. Experimentation in our region. A project to have a nation of majoritarian, hate-filled cartels that will pave the way for easy access and exploitation of whatever resources our region may have, by pitting communities against each other, rather than allowing us our constant, everyday, messy negotiations, give and take, and contradictions. Now, please don't get me wrong, I'm not here to glorify my region, my state, to romanticize its culture, customs, and practices. It has never been all love and fair play. There are fights, there are claims, there are counterclaims, and we have our fair share of looters, oppressors, and patriarchs. However, if we are to reclaim our voices and spaces, we have to turn to our strength, that being our communities. The diversity and entanglements which communities bring is what, more than ever, we will have to recognize, reclaim, and work with. We cannot allow our communities to be used for a project that seeks to annihilate us. We as tribals cannot keep quiet when Dalits are targeted. We as Christians cannot allow our faith to be used to bring international legitimacy to a regime that persecutes our Muslim brothers and sisters. The union of communities is what we need, and we need to come together in solidarity of the many against one. And may I take this opportunity on this platform to also call out the so-called leaders of our northeastern states who have played the politics of convenience for power and allowed themselves to be subsumed under majoritarian politicking. They have sold us out, they have sacrificed our indigeneity, and even Christ they have sacrificed at the altar of greed. It is a myth that Meghalaya, Nagaland, Mizoram are being run by regional parties. What we have is actually BJP light, and even as we, as a people, rejected the BJP in the elections, we have BJP-directed governments. The Prime Minister merely throws us representational crumbs and images of him with cultural symbols like headgear or a tribal fabric wrapped around his neck, or badly mouthing some greetings in local language from an autocue, while his government passes laws like the Forest Conservation Amendment Act that blatantly takes away our land and forests from our control. We as citizens seem to be losing control over everything that makes this country ours. And at a time in our history when our institutions have been hollowed out, legislative processes hijacked, and when the ideals of liberty, equality, and secularism are being held to ransom, I hold on to some of the Khasi ideals as my personal existential weapons. For a Khasi, there are two important principles that we are supposed to use to guide our lives. Tip breu tip blay, and kamai yakahok. Tip breu tip blay literally translates into knowing humanity is knowing God. When the lens of humanity is systematically being blurred, being broken, and when a decade-long assertion of majoritarianism with its culture of impunity and the hate-filled mobs are tearing us apart, we have to piece it back together with the Khasi principle of tip breu tip blay. Knowing and embracing humanity forces us to be reflexive, and there can be no Vishwa Guru greater than a self that is directed by an understanding and acceptance and compassion for another. The other principle, Kamaya Kahok, means to earn righteousness, to live a life not of greed, but one of communitarian sufficiency. Today, when it has become difficult to distinguish government from private capital, and when corruption has been Adaninized, and development no longer remains a consultative process, but a diktat, emphasizing on this Khasi principle of Kama Ya Kaho has become even more relevant. So may I end by imploring all of us present today to tip brave tip blai, to Kama Ya Kaho, and to constantly remind ourselves that the India of today is not our destiny. Together we must continue to rage against the imprisonment we all feel. We need to constantly ask, do we want to live this way? Do we want to always have to look over our shoulder? Do we want to worry about the names that we have? Can't we enjoy a train ride the way we used to? Can't we sit at a table together and share our cuisines and joke about how I may be eating very smelly foods? So we need to also draw strength. And can't we do that from each other again? From the farmers and what they achieved at the borders of Delhi. We need to also look south to the peoples of Karnataka, of Kerala, of Tamil Nadu, and imbibe their sense of self to stand up against these bullies. Can't we borrow courage from Kashmiris, imagining a world beyond the prison bars, and from a subjugated Northeast that continues to draw breath? Can't we have a life like a river? We meander, we change course, we ebb and flow, we nurture, we also sometimes destroy. But we move forward with the promise of the expanse of an ocean awaiting. Thank you.